claim that the Bush economic policies are making the rich richer while sort of leaving some of the poor behind. The Treasury Department has taken a closer look at this and finds that, for now, it's not entirely true.
The numbers show half of the taxpayers who were near the bottom money-wise have moved up considerably in the last decade, while only about a quarter of the top 1%, the super wealthy, have remained at that level.
In fact, the median income of that group has actually declined. So does this Treasury Department study throw cold water on doom and gloomers who claim only the upper classes are growing under the Bush presidency?
All right, let's pose that question to our panel once again. Somebody in the upper income, or Eric Bowling, obviously. Do you feel any wealthier, Eric?
Well, yeah, whether I do or not, I'm not really going to tell you on air. But look,
I tried.
There's a couple of things that Pat and I were talking about in the green room. I mean, and she's going to hit on this. She said this in the past on air, that you look at Treasury receipts, and what you've seen is you've seen a massive increase in Treasury receipts. And what that tells you is the economy is growing. We're growing at a nice clip. You read, I don't know, 1.5%, 2.5%. Don't buy that number. We should talk to Peter about that. Probably the real number is somewhere around 5 or 6, because no one pays taxes that they don't have to. So if the Treasury Department receipts are increasing at 11 or 10 or 11%, that means the economy is growing well. Employment's in great shape. Look, again, do I have to say this one more time? Stay away from my dividends tax. Stay away from my capital gains tax. I don't care what you do with the rest.
Since you threw it to Peter, I will ask you, do you get a sense that the rich are getting a lot richer while leaving the middle class behind?
Well, some of the rich, certainly the rich on Wall Street have done really well. But I think in general, the middle class and even many in the upper class are not, in fact, better off. They're worse off. I think two of the big flaws of this study, I looked at it, is I think, number one, they're underestimating how much inflation there's actually been over that period. So I think that's skewing the results. I don't think we've had these big income gains if you have a real inflation rate that you use to adjust them. But also, they're not looking at the tremendous amount of debt that the typical household now has that they didn't have 10 years ago. And, a lot of people will try to minimize that by saying, well, but they have a house, and that house has this huge value. But I think those appraisals are phony. I think many people's homes are worth 20, 30, 40, or 50% less than what these studies are assuming. Meanwhile, there's tremendous amount of debt that Americans have that we didn't have in the past, and we have to pay that debt.
Pat, Peter brings up how they are able to judge inflation and how they kind of discount the worst parts of inflation. They give it a lower oomph and sort of estimate for that. That is disconcerting to a lot of people because, numbers can be skewed in any way, shape, or form.
They can be skewed, and people have been arguing, economists have been arguing over the way the inflation numbers are calculated for decades. There was a time when it was overstated. Now Peter says it's understated. The fact is you just need consistency in the overall inflation numbers, and one of the reasons why inflation numbers are coming in so modestly is the productivity numbers are so great. And that's what you're seeing in technology. When you pick up the telephone today and you dial for information, you don't get an operator. You get maybe James Earl Jones, which is what my telephone company gives me. And it's all automated. Well, you know what? It's a lot cheaper to have a system in place than it is to have employees. Those productivity numbers then allow other people to get raises. They're non-inflationary. So I think you have to look at it in balance. Certainly there's aspects of inflation like food inflation and energy that are a problem for a lot of people. But on the other hand, the television you put on your wall, the computer that you just bought, these have all been coming down. And inflation is, when you measure it, you have to measure a total market basket. You can't just be selective about the things that are really troublesome.
Right. And Gary, I was looking at that study as well earlier. I mean, this is a 10-year span of time. I mean, yes, housing is a problem right now. Yes, we're in a slump, but that's not going to be over a 10-year period, which is what this study was.
Right. Look, we don't live in a perfect world. I can show you stats that look good, stats that look not so good. I've got to tell you, look at one stat. The net worth of this country, it is an all-time high. And, some of Peter, what he says, have metal to it, but overall, we can talk debt, but we also have to talk about net worth. If everything he says is true, the stock market would be at 7,000 right now, and I think the markets are saying a little bit different. Yes, we've corrected here, but we just had 3.9% GDP speaks for itself. Unemployment is 4.7%. I just don't think things are as bad as some people are telling you.
Let me let Victoria jump in here. Can you really judge how well things are going if you look just at the stock market? Because a lot of people would say this is a big gambling casino, the stock market.
It is in some senses one huge hulking casino, but it's also a way to read the temperature of the economy. The stock market is trying to predict what's going to happen going forward at companies, and that affects all of us. That affects our wages. That affects whether we're employed or not. So the stock market, I think, is a decent indicator, but you also have to look at wages. You also have to look at employment, and those have held up tremendously despite lots of disruption. I mean, the mega disruption is that we're going from an economy that produces things to an economy that largely produces ideas. That could be a really disruptive thing, but we've done fairly well.
All right, guys, so what's the answer, Eric? I mean, what is the answer? Besides leaving your dividends alone, got that. So,
We get that message.
That's interesting. There are markets. There are indicators. The stock market is one of them. The housing market is another. The employment market is yet another. Is there inflation? Sure, there's inflation, but it's under control. Right now, things like oil and food are more expensive. They'll come down, and they're not going to be negative. They're not going to be deflationary when they come down. So we won't be able to say, hey, Peter, look at the price of oil. It went from 90 to 40, or the price of a banana just got cut in half, and say, is this deflationary? We won't be able to do that. That's why they're removed. You look at a bigger, broader picture of things. Inflation is at the Fed's comfort zone. It's between 1 and 2.5%, and it's okay. Things are okay. The employment market is in great shape. The housing market needs some help.
And we want inflation. The worst thing that could happen is deflation.
Oh,
Let me give you what deflation gives you. It gives you 1932, 1933, 1934. Those were deflationary periods. We want inflation. We just don't want a lot of it.
Before we wrap this, go, Peter. 20 seconds.
Well, that's a bunch of nonsense. You know, falling prices. We had falling prices from 1790 till 1813 for 140 years. That's the best thing that can happen to consumers, is that the cost of buying things goes down. You know, that's what you want. That's the natural tendency in a free market. And I disagree. We've had a terrible economy these last 6 or 7 years. It's a complete disaster, and we're about to pay the price for it.
You know, the millions of people.
Where were you living?
You know, the